Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to episode 44 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the Velocity processor, which is one of the many MIDI effects plugins that come with Logic 10. The Velocity processor basically does exactly what it sounds like it does. It processes your velocity values. So what you can do is you can take an input value of, say, maybe 64, and then you can process it so maybe it's louder or softer than 64. Actually, the playback is louder or softer than 64. It doesn't actually change the MIDI data in your MIDI editor. So there's basically three modes for the Velocity processor. You have compression expansion, value range, and add scale. So let's start with compression expansion. And actually, first, while I have this turned off, let me just play you my musical example. It's just a basic piano idea. There's a few varying velocities in it, and overall it's pretty soft and mid-range velocity-wise as far as the dynamics are concerned. There you go. So what the compression expansion mode does is it essentially it kind of behaves like an audio compressor, where you can set a threshold for compression, set a compression ratio or the compression amount, and then you can add gain to it to kind of I don't want to say flatten, but you can even out the dynamic range of audio with a compressor. Here we can kind of even out the velocity range of the playback on our instrument. So there's three controls, and they basically behave much like an audio compressor would. The threshold sets essentially what notes are going to be processed. So if I set this to 74, that means that velocities higher than 74 will be processed. The ratio is essentially how much compression you have. So if you pull this up, you'll see that the top velocity values are pushed down, and this is based on where the threshold is set. So if I set this to something like, say, 60, that means that notes above 60 will be compressed, and then notes below 60 will not be compressed. And then on top of that, you can add gain makeup. This is a lot like adding gain back to your signal in an audio compressor. Here we're just adding back velocity value. So if I had originally a softer recording, and I'm compressing a soft recording to make it even quieter, then you can add velocity back to it to kind of bring it to kind of a medium range or a louder range. So let's try this first with the makeup set at 0. So now our whole recording is very, very quiet, but there's still some dynamic variances from note to note. If I wanted this to be a little louder, I could pull the gain makeup up, and then I'm going to end up with a much louder recording. So the velocities are a lot higher, and my lower values have also been pushed up as well. Now there's two modes for the makeup knob. If you click on this auto button, basically what it does is instead of giving you a relative, how much are you adding or subtracting, instead of giving you like a relative value, it gives you a fixed value. So it'll physically tell you, you can't have any velocities higher than, say, 55 here. So you can set that to a fixed value, and then no velocities will go above that value. Okay, so that's the compression expansion mode. I didn't really show this, but you can also expand your velocity range as well. If you want, you can, there we go. You can add gain without compression, and then pull your threshold up or down, and you can make more notes go to the maximum velocity. So you can say, for this example, say a velocity of input velocity of 80 is actually going to sound like a velocity of 127. So that's how it works as an expander. All right, let me set these back to their default values, and let's move over to the value range mode. Value range is very simple. Instead of working like a compressor, it works like a limiter, and there's two modes. There's range and value. Value basically fixes all of the notes in your recording to a fixed velocity. So if I want everything to be 76, I just move the slider to 76, make sure I'm on value, and everything will be the same velocity, and every note will be velocity of 76. Or if I want everything to be max velocity, 127, I can do that as well. This is particularly helpful with like synthesizers and like electronic drum kits and things like that, where you want every note to just kind of be the same velocity, just for to have no dynamic contrast. Range, it still works like a limiter, except you can limit the highest most velocities and the lowest most velocities. So if I pull this to a range of 57 to 98, what that means is that none of my velocities that are below 57 are going to maintain their original velocity. So anything below 57 is actually going to be moved up to 57, and anything that's above 98 is going to be moved down to 98. And so you can kind of, again, you're just limiting the high and lowest range of your velocity. So you can still have a little bit of dynamic contrast, but you can kind of set how wide you want that contrast to be. The last mode is add scale, and basically what this does is it allows you to scale your velocities by a percentage. So right in the center at 100%, it means that all the velocities are going to sound as they were recorded. As you boost this up, you can add a percentage to each note in your MIDI region. What I prefer is just to use fixed values when adding them, and that's what the add button, the add slider does. It adds or subtracts a fixed value to each note. I guess the advantage of using scale over add is that if you pull down your values by a percentage, you're never going to end up with notes that are essentially off, that are at 0 or 1, that are going to be either not heard at all or barely heard. With add, if you subtract your values too much, you'll end up with some notes that just don't even come through. So I'm pretty sure by subtracting by a larger value like that, I'm essentially getting notes that have velocities of 1. I guess you can't actually have a velocity of 0 because it would just mean no sound at all. But I'm having notes that are actually at a velocity of 1. So, but if I pull add up, I can, if this whole recording, like I want to maintain the dynamic contrast, but I just want it to be a little bit louder, you can just bump this up a little bit, say 30. The whole thing's going to still have the dynamic contrast it had before, but every velocity is going to have 30 added to it. And there you go. That's the velocity processor. Now, just a couple things I want to mention before I wrap up the video. This pretty much is it for the MIDI plugins, at least as far as the individual tutorials for them. A few people have asked if I'm going to be showing the scripter plugin, and at least in the main series, I'm not going to show the scripter plugin because, first of all, the scripter plugin basically lets you process MIDI via code. You know, you can type in JavaScript or copy in JavaScript presets, and you can process MIDI, you know, by code. I do, believe it or not, have a little bit of coding experience, but not enough to do anything useful here. So I might later on show the scripter maybe as like a, you know, like an appendix video or something like that. But it's going to take some learning on my part. I'm going to actually have to go learn some of the little bits of code to show you what you can do with it. So for now, I'm skipping the scripter, but that's pretty much all of the MIDI effects plugins. Now, a lot of people have been asking me about mixing and mastering techniques and whether or not we're going to be covering that in this series, and it will be covered. It's still several videos out because after this video, then in the next video, I'm going to show you how to use automation in the MIDI effects plugins. And then after that, I'm going to do a basic overview of each of the more important software instruments. So this includes like Ultrabeat, the ES2, Sculpture, EXS24. I'll probably do one just on the retro synth because it's new. I'll probably do something on the drummer plugin because that's new as well. These won't be like full walkthroughs, but more or less just overviews on how to use them. Because if you've seen my ES2 tutorial that I have, it's like a 4-part series or a 3-part series, and it's long. It's like 2 hours long, and I don't want to have to do that for each one of the instruments. So after this, I'll do a a basic overview of the more important instruments, and then we'll move on to mixing and mastering, which will take many videos. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks again for watching.